The diesel electric multiple units, DEMU for short, was a sort of a term. Basically the southern region were looking to operate a lot of the secondary lines. So we're looking at, obviously with the ageing steam fleet, this line was worked primarily by M7s on push-pull trains through to Alton and back from Southampton area. With the 1957 they bought out obviously the Hastings sets, the 6-car Hastings units that were built for the Hastings services to London. And these were pretty successful, so they looked at a 2 and 3 car units to work on secondary routes in Hampshire, hence the phrase the Hampshire units. But effectively the chassis were built at Ashford Works and sent across to Eastleigh, just up the road, and they basically produced the DEMU fleet, the Hampshire units, from there. So there were about 3 different batches. From 1957 was the first lot. Our unit 1125 was built in 1959 and was one of the last of the Hampshire unit batches, and then they produced a batch of Berkshire units as they were known, and that was really as the effectiveness of the units proved themselves, they expanded the services out to Reading General, Reading as we know it in new money, hence the name Berkshire came into the mix and went beyond Hampshire. So yeah, effectively we've probably mentioned this before, but they were effectively given a 15-year lifespan. So they were built 57 with a view that the lines that they operated on during that 15 years would either be electrified or closed, obviously with sort of the way things were going. So a relatively short time span for what they were initially thought about, and particularly when you look at a lot of them ran till 2004, they had a pretty good innings, so it's way beyond what was dreamt of. Ironically, the service was that good that more people started using the trains. I think the route across here, I think it knocked about 22 minutes off the journey time with the Hampshire units. They had at least an hourly service, and as a result, more and more people were encouraged to use the trains, and much to the annoyance of the British Rail Board, no doubt, passenger numbers went the wrong way and went up, which is ultimately why we're here. In truth, I think without the Hampshire units, this would probably be very much like the Meon Valley line, and we'd be just seeing people walking dogs outside. It would be very much a sort of a Sunday afternoon stroll in the park, walking dogs, and the railway wouldn't have lived long enough to 73 to be here today. Yeah. So there was a big drive, actually, quite a big campaign. So this is a 1962 document, but there's basically a lot of stuff here about the sort of the routes that the units operated on. Season ticket fares and a real trying to encourage people to use the railways. So as I say, there was quite a bit of PR behind the scenes to sort of drive them forwards. And from times there were services from Alton to Portsmouth via Botley. Subsequently, it settled into effectively a Alton to Southampton terminus service, sort of near the old docks. That was the general route until they moved to Southampton Central. But it actually, even in today's world, it's probably still quicker to have used a Hampshire unit to get from Alton to Southampton than it would today by bus or any other means of transport going the long way around. So we've not necessarily moved forwards, but it was quite a thing in its day, definitely. Effectively, the issue is that the unit now is 64 years old. Having been built for a fairly short lifespan, we've way exceeded the bodywork's fairly ripe, probably a little overripe if we want to be honest about it. It's not quite a mobile mushroom farm, but it's heading that way. So it was the original design of windows without window frames. So a lot of the original Mark I coaches, we've still got 2 on the railway that are in service with flush glazed windows, and effectively the glass is stuck into the body side. So there's not actually a separate window frame. British Railways realised quite early on in the development of the Mark Is that this wasn't a great design, and subsequently moved to a separate window frame design. So 1125 being a 1959 Hampshire unit has still got the original stuck in glass. Over a period of time that does start to leak, which allows water ingress, and then basically Mother Nature takes its course, the upholstery gets wet, As soon as water gets inside, it's damaging floor, upholstery, all manner of things. So we reached a point, I think in 2019 was the last, I think it was October 19 was the last time 1125 ran, and we were reaching a point where it needed repairs to the bodywork on the side of the engine room. We started some work on that, which undoubtedly proved what we already thought about the bodywork when we started tearing into it. There were bits of biscuit tin in the roof, all manner of things, you know. So it only highlighted really the condition of the bodywork was going to need a fairly major job before too long. We also then got hit by COVID, so she was in the workshop in the carriage shop at the point where COVID dropped into our lap. So realistically, yeah. So 2019 was the last time she really carried passengers in anger. Which was quite interesting. When we took the unit to Alton the other week for the diesel gala, it was actually worked out that was the first time it's been over the new bridge at Butts Junction. So we hadn't quite realised it hadn't been to Alton since the best part of 2018. So yeah, that's fundamentally where we're at. It's the unit is mechanically sound, electrically okay. It's not really fit for human consumption from a passenger perspective. It's inextricably linked to us, in truth. It first came over here, I think, April 1960. It's the first recorded. We were very lucky. There was a chap who lived in Alton, Chris Small, who worked in the control at Waterloo, that lived in Mount Pleasant Road, who recorded an awful lot of stuff. So we're very grateful that he did, because obviously we know a lot more about what came over here and when. So I think it was April 1960 was the first occasion that 1125 came over, and effectively was part of the railway on and off. There were two-car units. There was issues with the Mid-Hants route because it's so steep that 3 cars were a problem. The passenger numbers going up was a great thing to have, but they tried putting middle coaches in, which created issues of getting up the hill, particularly in the winter time. The units have got electric train heat to heat the trains. Obviously, traditionally it was steam heat. So the electric train heat comes off the generator, which then means if the heat's on, you haven't got so much traction power to put to the motors. So they had a lot of problems getting 3 cars over the Alps in the early days. So 1125 was built as a 3-car, and it basically Eastleigh had 2 dedicated units to work the Alton trains, 1121 and 1122. They were the units that basically lived here all their lives. But when one of those units was out for exam or maintenance, bits and pieces, then it was a free-for-all for whatever was available. So that would have been when 1125 would have come over here from time to time. And on the last day of service, 4th of February 1973, 1125 was here, running as a 5-car unit with 1122, I think it was. So she actually worked the last but one service with the Hampshire Unit from Alton. I think it was a 2002 from Alton to Southampton. There was one more Hampshire Unit service after that, and then there was a special with a 33 and TC. So, you know, we've got as near as we're ever going to get to having our last train in BR service over here still with us, which is you know, must be fairly unique in railway terms, I would think. So it's an English electric engine. It's a 4-cylinder. It's a straight 4. It's a 4 SRKT. Engine, which is effectively the same engine as a Class 73. So it's exactly the same power unit as a Class 73. The main generator is a bit different. They're as near as damn it the same as a Class 73-0, the original Eastleigh built 6 locos. And so there's some changes. The main difference with a 73 is that's got quite a big silencer box on the roof. So that tends to quieten when the engine's down. That's why they sound similar but not the same. The Hampshire Unit Demus basically just had a square box as a bit of a muffler, but you know, that's really what gives you the thumping sound as the exhaust is getting up and away out the turbo, and you know, heading for space. So that's what gives it the evocative sound that, as I say, you know, makes them so characteristic. Mechanically, the unit 1125 is pretty sound. The engine runs nicely. It certainly had the cobwebs blown out in the last few weeks a little bit going to Alton, which would do it the power of good. We've kept barring the engine over, keeping everything nice and sweet, proving that there's oil getting where it needs to. Electrically, she's pretty good. There's a few machines that want a bit of work, but you know, the electrical side is actually pretty good. It's really the passenger compartments and the bodywork. The steel work is 1959 steel. The windows are actually in good order, but the interface between the windows and the body side is ultimately what's let the water in, or the lack of it. So there's a fair bit of reskinning required. So the roof is pretty good. The roof is actually pretty sound, but the bodywork really below the windows where they've leaked is where it's suffered, and the wooden door pillars. So the Hampshire units were built with aluminium doors by and large. It's only really the crew doors that were steel. So they've fared pretty well, but they're actually hanging off of a wooden door pillar, as with a Mark I coach, which is generally a fairly hard piece of wood that everything hangs off, and a lot of those will want replacing. So we're looking realistically at stripping out the passenger compartments, the nuts and bolts of the seats, the luggage racks, the armrests, to basically empty the shell out to be able to pull off the side walls. Unfortunately, to make the side walls nice, they have a bit of moquette down the side, basically the side cheeks, which unfortunately under a window that's leaking becomes a wick. So any water that does get in, it's then soaked into the side, which then soaks into the back of the seat, and so it goes on and on and on, which is fundamentally what we're looking at. So there's a lot of mould. So we're looking at effectively stripping the vehicle down to its framework above the chassis, cleaning the framework, reskinning most of the bodywork, door pillars, and probably the floor plywood as well, because some of the lino is lifting. So it's a fairly fundamental bodywork overhaul. Mechanically, as I say, she's pretty good. There's a bit of pipe work in places where steel pipe work has suffered over the years, but by and large, it's a sort of a bodywork overhaul rather than anything mechanical. We're effectively in the case at the moment of getting quotes for work, so we're looking at a couple of outside companies to have a look at. There's the option to see if there's scope to do stuff in-house. Some of that will depend on funding, in truth. Well, all of it will depend on funding, in truth. We've got a fundraising going at the moment to try and look to start the project going. As far as we've got a quote for some of the window pressings are actually available. We've done a bit of research, and the window pressings for the original Hampshire units are still available. They're the same as the Mark I suburban coaches. So there's a company that actually produces pressings for that off the shelf, which is useful. So that gives us a bit of a price to work at. So obviously there's a lot of metal work down there to produce. Equally, depending on where the work's done, then the labour costs go on top of that. So that obviously, I could give you a price for the steel work, which sounds quite reasonable, but when you start putting £30-40 an hour on for labour, that number suddenly starts getting an awful lot bigger. But so that's fundamentally the work we're looking at, is to really give the unit another 64 years life on its body. I don't think it owes us much, in truth. It's done well to get where it has, but as we've said before, everything we've got is precious, and everything lives outside. Long term, it would be lovely to be able to put all these things away at night, but they all live outside. She hasn't really been indoors since she left Selhurst in 2004, so it's 20 plus years ago. We've had a Facebook page running for a little while, 1125 Thumper, which appears on the glorious world of Facebook, and we've just started a Just Giving page for 1125. There's an option there to be able to make a donation through Just Giving, and to be able to gift aid that as well, being a charity. Then we're able to get the tax back through gift aid, which makes a big difference. And we're looking at the moment to try and actually build up a bit of a sort of a subscription thing. So, actually giving £11.25 a month for a period of 24 months, for example. It's about 36p a day when you actually look at it and actually break it down, in truth. So it's not an awful lot to give, but it makes a massive difference if 900 people put £11.25 in a month, every month for 2 years. There's our money and some to do the job quite easily. It suddenly becomes very achievable. I don't for a second think that everybody who subscribes to the Facebook page will be in a position to be able to do that or want to do that. That's their prerogative. But if we could get a fair number of people subscribing on a regular basis, some of these frightening numbers come down quite quickly. And we're looking at having a bit of a thing where once you've paid in over a certain amount, obviously we've got to formalise this yet, that you get entered into a prize draw, so there's a little bit of something back from it, a little bit of a raffle every 6 months where you win some prizes out of it, maybe a cab ride or a driving experience or whatever that might look like. But it's just a bit of an incentive for people to sort of subscribe to it. and ultimately have a bit of ownership in it. That's the beauty of it. There's a real opportunity to have some ownership in something that's fundamentally pretty important to us. You know, the merchant navies came through here once or twice a month. During '66, when the diversions were on, there was a Hampshire unit outside the window here twice an hour, every hour, for the best part of 16 years. So it's a intrinsically important part of this whole fabric of the place. There's a direct lineage through to the M7 tanks and the Drummond engines through the Hampshire units. And the other bit that often gets missed is it's a part of everyday life that's disappeared. You know, if you think the Hampshire units were around from 57 to 2004, there's a lot of generations that have had a footprint somewhere in those units. And it's the smells, the noise, the doors, the compressors, the thumping that we talked about. You know, that's quite an evocative sound that people think, oh, do you know what, I remember this. My nan travelled to work on this, or I went to school on it, or I commuted on it. And it's one of these funny things, a bit like a Ford Escort, that no one took any notice of them when they were out there. Everybody had one. It was just like white noise. You just ignored it. It was just there. And then all of a sudden, 2004, it's not. You know, so it's a little bit of social history in a weird way. They weren't particularly exotic. You know, they're not as sexy maybe as a merchant navy might be seen as, or an A4 Pacific. But actually, from a point of view, they outlived most of their contemporaries. They got on and did the job and did it very, very well, and ultimately kept lines open long enough. Swanage here, lots of railways are actually here still because of them. So yeah, I think it's one of those difficult things. It's interesting with the 4VEP group, they're doing the same work, and I don't think people have realised quite how important some of that history is on a social level. You know, you went to work on one every day, you read the paper on it, we all moaned about them, but actually you look back and you think, do you know what, they've all disappeared. You know, there were hundreds of them at one time, and now there's next to none. You know, so yeah, it's an important thing. Maybe not the most glamorous part of life, but certainly a big chunk of it that deserves its place.